My name is Diane and I'm 36 years old. 3 days ago, my brother called me out of nowhere. Not to check in, not to ask how my son was growing up, not to see if I was still standing after everything life had thrown at me. He called to tell me I needed to liquidate my husband's business assets, $2 million in 30 days, to rescue the family from a debt spiral they'd kept quiet for years. The same family that had skipped my wedding because my husband's profession wasn't impressive enough to put on a social media post. The same mother who once told my brother's kids that Aunt Diane had gone off and thrown her future away. The same brother whose sharp-tongued wife once looked Marcus in the eye at Thanksgiving and asked, very sweetly, if he'd ever thought about doing something with his life. And now they need us. Before I tell you what happened at my father's 65th retirement celebration, what was exposed, and what I chose to do, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story is genuinely speaking to you. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I want to know where you're listening from. Let me take you back to where this all really started. 9 years ago, I was the daughter my mother quietly pointed to at every neighborhood gathering. Duke graduate, logistics coordinator at a regional development company in Charlotte. The kind of title that made Patricia Holloway stand just a little straighter when she mentioned it to acquaintances. My Diane, she would say, smoothing her blazer with a satisfied hand. She's got a real head for business. She's going places. I believed her. I believed that trajectory was carved into my future. Regional director by 40, a husband with a credentials list and a golf membership, a life that looked exactly the way my mother had imagined it would look. Then I met Marcus at a weekend craft fair outside Asheville. I'd gone alone, needing distance from everything, from the quarterly reports, from the performance reviews, from the steady low-grade exhaustion that had started to feel like personality. He was at a small booth in the back, selling hand-built furniture. A dining table with dovetail joints so clean they looked machine-made. A set of chairs that had warmth built into every curve. He had sawdust on his collar, and the kind of quiet confidence that didn't need an audience. When he talked about wood grain and joinery, and the way a well-made thing could outlast everyone who'd ever doubted it, his whole face changed. I came back the next day, and then the following weekend. When I finally brought him home to meet my family, my mother studied his hands for a long moment before saying anything. So Marcus, she said, her voice perfectly pleasant, do you have plans to expand into anything more scalable? He didn't wince. He didn't apologize. He just nodded thoughtfully and said, I'm scaling toward quality. That takes time. The silence after that was the kind that makes the walls feel closer together. My brother Garrett, standing by the kitchen island, exchanged a look with his wife Sandra. She pressed her lips together. He looked away. I pretended I hadn't seen it. That was only the beginning. Our wedding was a small affair, a restored barn outside the city, 40 people, string lights, food from a local place Marcus had done some work for. My mother wore her gracious face, the one she reserved for situations she'd decided to endure. Garrett and Sandra arrived in a brand new SUV, freshly leased. Sandra made a point of mentioning the interior package twice. During the reception, when someone asked Marcus what he did, Garrett answered for him. He makes furniture, he said, the pause before furniture doing all the work. Then Garrett smiled at the room and said, some people find their calling early. Some people find a hobby and call it a calling. A few people laughed at the edges. Marcus set down his glass, looked at Garrett calmly, and said, and some people spend 30 years chasing other people's definitions of success. We'll see who's happier. The laugh faded. Then came my mother's toast. She stood with a champagne flute, looked around the room with that measured smile, and I made the mistake of hoping. Diane has always done things her own way, she began. She's stubborn like her grandmother was stubborn. A soft laugh. Then the shift. I just hope she remembers that love alone doesn't pay a mortgage. She glanced at Marcus, then away. I hope she knows what she's getting into. My grandmother on my father's side, Nana Ruth, reached under the table and gripped my wrist. Don't you let that land anywhere, she said quietly. She doesn't know what she's looking at. That night, I made a decision I didn't announce to anyone. I would leave Charlotte. I would build a life with Marcus. And I would stop holding my breath, waiting for my family to understand something they'd already decided they wouldn't. I just didn't expect it to take 8 years for the truth to catch up with all of us. Western North Carolina received us like it had been holding space. We bought a workshop and a small house on 6 acres outside a town that didn't ask too many questions. Marcus was in the shop before light most mornings, and I learned to love the smell of cedar and linseed oil the way I used to love the smell of fresh coffee in a conference room. Within 2 years, Marcus's custom furniture was being written about in regional design publications. Within 4, architects from Atlanta and Washington were calling him directly. We took on an apprentice. Then 2. Our son, Cal, arrived on a rainy April morning with loud opinions and Marcus's watchful eyes. He started walking early and immediately made himself a helper, handing Marcus tools he didn't need and narrating everything he observed. We were, by every measure that mattered, doing well. But there was something Marcus had asked me not to mention. During our first couple of years, while I thought he spent his evenings sketching new designs, he'd quietly been doing something else. Consulting. His undergraduate background was in industrial design, but what most people didn't know was that he'd spent 4 years before we met working for a boutique design firm that specialized in commercial interiors for hospitality brands. He'd left because the work felt hollow, but the network didn't disappear. A former colleague had approached him about a licensing arrangement, Marcus's joinery techniques, adapted for mid-market production. He'd negotiated carefully, kept it out of conversation, kept building. They don't need to know, he told me once, meaning my family. My life doesn't require their acknowledgement. I never disagreed. But I always wondered what would happen when they found out. The call came on a Wednesday evening. Cal had finally gone to sleep after an hour of stalling, and I was sitting on the back porch with a cup of tea going cold in my hands. My mother's number appeared on the screen. Not my brother. My mother directly. That was unusual enough to make my chest tighten before I even answered. She wasn't crying, which was somehow worse. She was composed, deliberate, her voice carrying that particular flatness that meant she was frightened and refusing to show it. "Diane, I need you to listen to me carefully." I set the tea down. "I'm listening. Your brother's company is in trouble, real trouble. He took on investors for his expansion last year, and the projections he gave them were wrong, legally wrong. He's being sued, and he needs to settle before it goes further. $2 million. I felt the air shift around me. Where do you expect that to come from? Marcus's business. It's valuable, isn't it? He could bring in a partner, sell the licensing rights outright. It's a reasonable ask. You want us to sell what Marcus built to cover Garrett's legal bills. I want you to help your family." Her voice didn't waver. That's what families do. I heard Marcus behind me. He'd come out without my noticing, standing in the doorway. "I need time to think," I said. "There isn't much time, Diane. I know, I'll call you back." I hung up and stayed still for a moment. "You heard," I said, "most of it." He came and sat beside me. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking Garrett wouldn't call me. He had Mom do it. That means he already knows what answer he'd get from me directly." I paused. "I'm also thinking about something," she said, "that the projections he gave investors were legally wrong. That's not bad luck. That's fraud." "Yes," I said, "it is. I didn't sleep well." In the morning, after Marcus took Cal to school, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and started looking. Garrett's company was a mid-size logistics firm he'd launched 5 years ago with backing from a group of private investors. He'd positioned it as a technology-forward operation, promising margins that, reading the coverage now, never quite materialized. A legal news aggregator had a brief item from 6 weeks ago. Holloway Logistics facing civil suit from investor group alleging misrepresentation of growth metrics. Garrett's name, in print. I kept digging. A business forum thread mentioned him by name. Someone had written, "Holloway oversold the whole model." The tech integration was never real. Anyone who looked at the numbers for more than 5 minutes should have known. I found an old connection, a woman named Terry Vaughn who'd been at my old company and moved into financial consulting. I texted her, then called when she replied quickly. "Garrett Holloway," she said, and the tone told me everything. "Yeah, that situation's been circulating in certain circles for a couple months. The investors aren't small players. They're going to get their money back one way or another." What was the core problem? He projected revenue from a software integration that wasn't ready. Maybe was never going to be ready. Told investors it was operational. It wasn't. A pause. Diane, is this your brother we're talking about? Yes, I'm sorry, she meant it. There might be more, too. I've heard there were personal accounts involved in some of the early capital movements. I don't have details. Personal accounts. Like family money, a careful silence. That would be consistent with what I've heard. I thanked her and hung up. Marcus had come back. He was leaning against the counter, watching me. What did you find? He didn't just make bad decisions, I said. He misled his investors. And I think he may have used my mother's money as part of the operating capital without disclosing it properly. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Did he know about the licensing deal? I looked up. What? I always assumed your brother monitored my business more than he let on. He made a few comments over the years. About valuation. About market position. Marcus's expression was calm. I'm wondering if he factored our assets into his thinking about what was available to him. That thought sat heavily between us. My phone lit up. A text from my mother. Your father's celebration is Saturday. Please come. We need to talk in person. Garrett will be there. I showed it to Marcus. Do you want to go? He asked. I want to see my father, I said. Everything else we can handle. The venue was the kind of place my mother considered appropriate for milestones. A private room at a members club, warm wood paneling, photographs of golf courses on the walls, a long table set for 30 guests. My father's 65th. He'd retired 3 weeks ago from his position at an engineering consultancy he'd worked at for 22 years. Marcus and I arrived exactly on time. My mother met us near the entrance. She looked composed, controlled, her greeting calibrated to the presence of other guests. Diane, you came, a glance at Marcus. Both of you. Good. She said good the way people say it when they mean necessary. My father found us within minutes. Paul Holloway looked genuinely glad to see us lighter somehow, without the structure of office life pressing on him. He shook Marcus's hand with both of his. I'm glad you're here. Both of you, I mean that. Something in his face said he did. Nana Ruth was at a corner table near the window. She caught my eye and waved me over before I'd even taken my coat off. When I reached her, she held my hand and looked at me carefully. You know what this is really about, she said quietly. I know. Don't let them back you into a corner with all these people watching. I won't. Garrett was already seated at the center of the table, looking like a man performing composure. Sandra sat beside him in a dress that required occasion. He didn't stand when I came in. He nodded, I nodded back. The dinner moved through its courses, pleasant on the surface, taut underneath. My father gave a brief speech about gratitude, about the strange luxury of time, about looking forward. He didn't mention Garrett's situation. He didn't mention money. He looked at Marcus when he talked about men who build things that last. Then my mother stood up. I'd like to say a few words about family, she began, and I felt the table reorganize itself around that phrase. She talked about legacy, about what it meant to support one another, about the years she'd spent making sure her children had every advantage. And then she turned toward me, and a member of the staff appeared from somewhere with a document folder, which was placed, without ceremony, in front of my empty dessert plate. Diane has built something with her husband, my mother said, her voice carrying through the room. A real business. Something with value. It was the first time she had ever described Marcus's work that way, and the fact that she was doing it now, here, in front of 30 people, with a folder of documents waiting for my signature, told me everything I needed to know about why. Our family is facing a difficult moment, she continued. And I'm asking Diane, I'm asking both of them to help us through it. What's $2 million to people who have built what they've built? Garrett looked at me from across the table. His expression was the expression of a man who had calculated the room and decided it was in his favor. It's a straightforward transaction, he said. We've had someone draw up the terms. Fair market value for the licensing rights, a bridge loan arrangement for the remainder. Very clean. I looked at the folder. I didn't open it. Before I respond, I said, keeping my voice even, I'd like to ask you something, Garrett. His expression flickered. What? How did you describe Marcus's licensing revenue in your investor projections? The table went quiet. Not completely, there were still the sounds of a room, but the quality of the attention changed. That's not relevant, he said. I think it is. I looked around the table steadily. You're asking us to transfer a significant asset. I want to understand how that asset has already been used. Sandra put her hand on Garrett's arm. He moved it aside. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I kept my tone level, almost gentle. I found the civil filing. Investor group alleging misrepresentation of projected revenue. I also found references to capital sourcing that apparently involved accounts that weren't disclosed properly. I paused, and I spoke with someone familiar with the situation, Garrett. She told me the software integration you promised your investors was never operational. My mother's hand moved toward her water glass and stopped. Diane, she said quietly, this isn't the place. You made it the place, Mom. I didn't say it harshly. You put a document in front of me at Dad's retirement party with 30 people watching because you thought the setting would make it harder for me to say no. I understand the logic, but I need to finish. Nana Ruth, at her corner table, sat forward. I continued. Garrett didn't have bad luck. He made promises to investors that he knew or should have known he couldn't keep. He may have moved money in ways that will require further legal review. And he's now asking us to cover the consequences using assets we built, assets he spent years treating as a joke. I let a breath pass. 7 years ago, Sandra asked Marcus in front of our families if he'd ever thought about doing something with his life. I'd like everyone here to know what he's done with it. I pulled up the licensing agreement summary on my phone, not the Forbes piece, there was none, but the industry newsletter that had covered the arrangement last year, with figures that were a matter of public record, and I handed it to the woman beside me. It moved around the table. This is what Marcus has built, I said, quietly, without press releases, without promising anyone anything he couldn't deliver. Garrett's face had gone a careful, rigid neutral. Sandra was looking at the table. My father spoke for the first time since the dinner, his voice slow and deliberate. Garrett, is what your sister's describing accurate? Garrett didn't answer immediately. The situation is complicated. That's not an answer. Sandra made a small sound. Garrett pushed back from the table slightly. I had every reason to believe the projections were achievable, he said finally. Markets shifted. Markets, my father repeated. Then he set his napkin on the table and said nothing else. Marcus had been still throughout all of this. Now he stood, not quickly, not dramatically, just stood, and the room adjusted. I built my business to last, he said simply. Not to impress anyone, not to prove anything. Because I wanted to make things that would still be standing after I was gone. That's what I did, that's all. He looked at Garrett with an expression that had no malice in it. You mistook quiet for ignorance. I understand why. You were working with incomplete information. He sat back down. My mother looked at the unsigned folder on the table. Diane, her voice was smaller, we still need help. Whatever Garrett did, I still stand to lose my home. I know, I said. Then, I'm not signing this. I moved the folder aside. Our licensing rights are not collateral for Garrett's legal settlements. That's not a negotiation. I steadied myself. But I'm not willing to watch you lose your home over something you didn't choose either, Mom. You trusted him. That's not nothing. I looked at Marcus. He gave me a slight nod. We'll offer a personal loan, I said. Enough to cover the mortgage payments on your house through the legal process, so you have time to sort out what's actually recoverable. Not from our business. From us, personally. My mother stared at me. There are conditions, Marcus said. Garrett enters into a formal repayment plan, documented and legally binding, to repay the full amount over 5 years with interest. He engages with the legal process transparently, rather than attempting to shift costs to people who had no part in creating them. He paused, and this is the last time any arrangement of this nature is brought to us in a setting designed to make refusal look like cruelty. Garrett stood abruptly. You want me to sign a repayment agreement to my brother-in-law? After everything, Marcus said, yes. This is humiliating then decline, Marcus said. The offer stands until Monday. After that, it doesn't. Garrett left the room. Sandra followed, not before glancing back once at the table with an expression that was hard to read. The room slowly recovered itself. Guests began making excuses. My father sat at the end of the table, looking at his hands. My mother hadn't moved. After a long while, she looked up at me. I didn't know, she said, about the investors, about what he'd actually told them. Her voice was very careful. I gave him money 3 years ago. I thought it was for growth capital. He said it was an investment. I believe you. She blinked. I don't think she'd expected that. You trusted the person you thought you knew, I said. You were wrong about him. You've also been wrong about Marcus for a long time. Tonight, I hope at least one of those things is clearer." She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. The week that followed brought the kind of quiet that comes after weather. Garrett's attorney reached out on Thursday, not to decline, but to ask for clarification on the repayment terms. It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't refusal. Sandra called me, unexpectedly, on Friday evening. "I want you to know I had no idea about the investor situation," she said. "I know how I've been toward Marcus. I don't have a good explanation for it. I just wanted to say that." I told her I heard her. We didn't resolve anything in that call, but it was real, and real conversations tend to compound over time. My father called Sunday, as he'd apparently started doing. My mother mentioned it in a brief text, not to discuss any of it, just to talk. He asked about Cal. He asked about the shop. He asked if Marcus would consider teaching him something about woodworking, someday, if there was time. I told him I'd ask Nana. Ruth stayed with us for 10 days after the party. She sat in the shop with Marcus one afternoon while Cal napped, watching him work, asking questions about the joinery. When she left, she pressed a small box into my hand on the porch. Inside was a ring, simple, old gold, a pearl set low. "My mother's," she said. "I want you to have it. Not for any occasion, just because I want someone who'll appreciate it to have it." I wore it home that evening and didn't take it off. 3 weeks later, I was sitting on the porch as October settled in, watching Cal and Marcus in the yard. Marcus was showing him how to feel for the grain of a piece of scrap wood, guiding his small hands along the surface. Cal was narrating everything loudly, as he did. Their voices carried in the cooling air. 8 years ago, I had been afraid. Not of leaving my job, not of changing my life, not even of being wrong. I'd been afraid of becoming invisible to the people I'd grown up needing to be seen by. But the thing about building something real is that it doesn't need anyone to validate it. It just stands there. Cal looked up and waved at me from across the yard. I waved back. Whatever my mother decided, whatever Garrett chose, whatever shape the next version of our family took, we were not waiting on it. We had a workshop. We had a child who narrated the world like a sports commentator. We had land and work, and the particular piece of people who have stopped performing and started living. The offer expired on Monday. Garrett's attorney called at 11:42 a.m. to say they were prepared to agree to the terms. He didn't call himself, but the terms held. And real, I had come to understand, was always going to be worth more than impressive thank you for staying with me to the end. If you've ever had to hold your ground with people who expected you to fold, drop your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. For more stories like this one, check the link in the description. Take care of yourself. You're allowed to protect what you've built, even from family, especially from family.